Baik ya, kita mulai ya.
Siap Mbak, silakan Mbak.
Baik, makasih. Oke. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, our guest speakers and also participants of the Southeast Asia Election and Democracy Series of Discussion conducted by Asia Pacific Regional Support for Election and Political Transition or RESPECT program. RESPECT program is a program run by Association for Election and Democracy or Perludem and supported by USAID or USAID. Today, we will continue the regular discussion on election and democracy in Asia Pacific to discuss about the future election technology in Asia Pacific countries. The introduction of information and communication technologies or ICT into the electoral process is generating both interest and concern among voters as well as practitioners across the globe. Today, most electoral management bodies or EMBs around the world use new technologies with the aim of improving the electoral process. These technologies range from the use of basic office automation tools such as word processing and spreadsheets to more sophisticated data processing tools such as database management systems, optical scanning, and geographic information system. One of the important application of technology to election is e-voting, the use of electronic technology in casting or counting votes. In connection with the pandemic that has hit almost all countries in the world, as well as the desire to modernize the electoral process, various countries, including Indonesia, of course, are preparing information technology, both election technology or voting technology. So the today discussion, we have three main objectives. First, to provide an understanding and comparative study of the use of technology in election from several countries, including the potential for its application. Second, to provide information on the role of civil society in monitoring the use of electoral technology. And the third, the last one, to provide participants with a perspective on electoral technology and strengthening participatory democracy. We will discuss the topic for the next hour and a half. Now, together with us, we have election speakers who are very expert on their field. First, I would like to welcome Mr. Muhammad Sanim, Supervisor of Election of Republic of Fiji. Welcome, Mr. Sanim, to our discussion. How are you?
Thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Okay, thank you. And second, I would like to welcome Ms. Rona and Karitos, Executive Director of the Legal Network for Truthful Election or LENTE, Philippines. Hi, Ona, how are you? Long time no see.
Hi, Tini. Good afternoon. I'm good. Long time no see as well. And thank you very much to Perludem for giving me and Lente this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. And last but not least, of course, Mr. Peter Wolf, senior expert from International IDEA, Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Mr. Peter helping Perludem and also Indonesian election in so much during 2019 election and also for 2020 election. Welcome, Mr. Peter Wolf. Thank you for joining us today. Good morning, Stockholm.
Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this event.
Okay. We will start the discussion by having the speakers to present their point of view on our topics, and then will be followed by question and answers. Hopefully, each speaker will deliver their presentation for 15 minutes. I would like also to welcome the Executive Director of Perludem, Mbak Hoirunisah Nur Agustiati, and also the Chief of Party of Respect Program, Mbak Teresia Joyce Damayanti. Welcome Mbak Ninis and Mbak Joyce to this program.
Thank you, Titi.
Yeah. For the first speaker, I would like to invite Mr. Sanim to present his presentation with the topics on the stages of the election that involve election technology in Fiji, the challenges, the risks, and the best practices. Mr. Sanim, the time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And once again, I'd like to thank the organizers for availing me this opportunity to present alongside Peter and Rona. I think, as far as I know, I've met both of them. Once in Sri Lanka, I think I met Rona. And Peter, I've met you many times now. So it is a pleasure. And I'd like to also advise that my colleagues from the Fijian Elections Office are also tuning in to this presentation. And I'm sure they will be asking me many questions, not on chat or not here, but on chat later, but just trying to protect myself. I will straight away get on to my presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of technology, when in elections, it is my view that when we're looking at technology in elections, we're basically looking at automation. Automation of all the processes. Basically, there is the word automation for me is better suited to the use of technology, is because it's just basically bringing computerization to manual tasks. We're still having ballot papers, we're still having results, we still have basically all of those processes, except it's not happening on a manual ballot paper with a pen and paper, but effectively happening on digital space. So hence, this is going to be my attempt at this concept, and I know experts like Peter and Rona will be able to correct me where I might be off the topic. So I work in the Fijian Elections Office, and I just thought to use this moment to also show you where on the map we are. If you can't find us, it's right on the bottom right-hand corner of this presentation. It's a very small country. Actually, it's just too small to be on the map even. So that's where we are, and the rest of you can see us from the rest of the world. We're right down there next to Australia. About the Fijian Elections Office. Fijian Elections Office was formally established in 2014. We're not a big office. We have about 45 staff, and at election time we have to hire over 10,000 staff, but directly from the members of the public. We don't hire civil servants, don't work for us at the election. We have to hire people to directly work for us in the election. So far under our belt, we have 2 general elections. One is the 2014 election, which we conducted on 17th September. We were established formally on the 28th of March, and we ran the first election on 17th of September. And what many of my colleagues call it building a ship as it was flying. And then we have the 2018 election, which we had time to prepare for, and we had our own strategic plans, etc. The next election in Fiji is in 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, since we're talking a lot about automation, I think a picture speaks a 1,000 words. And in the picture on the screen right now, what you see is the elections officials recruitment system in action. So we are required to hire over 10,000 people to work in the elections on an open merit system. So every person who is employed basically has to beat another person to get the job. And the competition is good because over 17,000 people applied for the last election and we hired over 10,000. So against the advice of HR experts, we developed the recruitment platform, basically automated how the manual system would go, and we hired as many people as we needed. So basically another automation there. We in addition to the recruitment system, we have our website. It's one of the first interactive websites in terms of election management bodies that is disability friendly. At the time when we built the website back in 2016, a lot of the election management bodies around the world were still contemplating on how to get around to doing it. We have social media pages. Fiji also has touchscreen voting machines, not used in general elections. We use it for trade union elections. We went out on a limb and we developed a mobile-based voting system where you can vote from your phone using the MMI system, but we shelved it because nobody used it. We have customized web applications for election operations, many of these actually, in terms of automation. I wanted to talk about the eVuli platform, which is our Moodle platform for online training of election staff. Then we have many software solutions also. So the most common one is the HR and the finance system. But we also have developed a comprehensive election management information system, which looks into all the aspects of elections, and it basically is a database that allows us to see good reports as well as on-screen activity progress. Fiji has a biometric voter registration system, and every voter in Fiji receives a voter card. We also have an electronic result management system. In our electoral system, there are 200. In the last election, there were 242 candidates, and we have to release results because it's a single constituency, and we have to release the results for the 242 candidates for the 2,050 plus polling stations around the country. So it's a very big Excel sheet. For anyone who would be interested in doing it on Excel, but we just use the result management system. Ladies and gentlemen, inside the elections office, we have a very interactive intranet platform. And the last one is our custom-built mobile apps, something that I will be talking about in this presentation. So this is our strategy at the Fijian elections office. We don't want to be over ambitious and immediately jump many steps and say, let's get an electronic voting system in. But we want to acquire and adapt or build solutions that will be cost effective, sustainable, and also allow for continuous customization so that we are able to continue to have those solutions relevant to our operational needs. We don't want to build something and then eventually it is of no use. So instead, we want to build something that we can continue to modify and continue to use over many elections. In terms of our long-term planning, the Fijian Elections Office has dedicated an entire pillar on technology. Our goal for that pillar is to adapt the most latest and current technologies to enhance the efficiency of the delivery of FEO objectives. Many experiences show that a lot of EMBs develop these hundreds of apps, hundreds of solutions, and then eventually what happens is that not much of them are used, or not much of them are usable as well. So because we are very small in nature, our country is also very small, we have to be very careful about this. So in terms of automation, we're going with whatever is going to be relevant in the next 10 years maybe. So I mean, 10 years in technology world is like a lifetime actually. Sorry, I said it wrong. 10 years in technology world is like a minute, and it may be our lifetime for 10 years in technology world. So we want to use, because of the pandemic, there is a crunch on every country's budget. There is also a crunch on the resources that we can have, and a crunch on the human resources as well. So we decided actually 2 years ago, when we were doing our strategic plan, we were thinking about using whatever is going to be hardware readily available instead of doing custom built machines. We wanted to go with things that would be still around, like mobile phones, tablets, laptops. Imagine like Dubai, when they had the elections, the UAE, they got a 42-inch touchscreen TV kind of machine where voters went and pressed the button to vote for somebody, pressed the screen. And straight after the election, they got rid of it. Of course, the UAE is able to afford some 3,000-4,000 custom-built touchscreen 40-inch voting machines. Probably the cost of those machines would be half my budget. So I went with whatever is possible. One thing that the pandemic brought about is that it has pushed more people to get smartphones, because many countries like Fiji, we are using Bluetooth technology to trace your movement or your contacts. And a lot of people are now migrating to smartphones. So we decided to look into solutions that could work on smartphones. So we don't have to buy people phones, they just download our app, and our app is free. And my IT guy wanted me to put it there that they also have an IT directorate, which is like a department within the office that is focusing on IT. And he's the one who's given me the rest of the slides on the mobile applications. And if I don't mention Amendra right now, I'm pretty sure I might be in trouble at a later date. So acknowledging Amendra's contribution to my presentation. So for the purposes of today's presentation on sharing the Fijian Elections Office practices, I talk about our results app, an app that is in development, the polling assistance app, a very successful rolled out survey app, and the Mercury app. We don't have good taste in naming our apps. So if you are listening in right now, these probably are as plain as we could get. The results app is actually the Fijian Elections Office pride. Because, as I said, our results are so complicated in nature, 245 candidates over 2,050 polling stations. You can vote for anybody anywhere in the country. That means a candidate may pick up one vote in one remote corner of the country, and you still have to list it. So in 2014, we built the result management system, which was the software. And we were publishing results in the very traditional manner, which was in the media. And it created a lot of problem because we had to read out 242 results every time we were publishing results. And imagine if we were doing it on an hourly basis. It worked very well because I got a lot of my staff some TV time, but it was not very conducive in terms of the person who has to read it more times than the staff. You're looking at him right now. So we built, the idea of the app came about on one of my trips, and I came back and I talked to the IT person and I said, look, I want to build an app and I want the app to do this. And he said, yeah, it can happen. And I said, okay, fine, do it. And he said, no, I want to do it as my own personal project. So on his own time, my staff, Vijendra, he built what you see on the screen right now. And if you have an Android phone, I invite you to please download the FEO results app so that you can play around with it yourself. And I'm happy to receive your views on any changes and that you think we could do to it. But in the South Pacific region, we were the first country, even Australia and New Zealand behind. We were able to launch something like this to deliver the results of the election. So from 2,050 polling stations and 245 candidates and 7 parties contesting the election, we were able to deliver the results in the palm of your hands on an half an hour basis or an hourly basis. And all you had to do was just touch the screen to get results, to get regular updates. You could get updates as soon as you picked up your phone, so you didn't have to go and look it up on a website or anything. Mind you, this similar platform was available on the website as well. But the app is what was more interesting because you could drill down right to a polling station and see what was the results at that polling station by candidate. And this added to the transparency of the election, because no one, well, they did, but no one could prove any kind of foul play, because the results from the polling station were directly reflected in the app. So if someone had observed the counting at a polling station and had taken a picture of the result sheet at the polling station, all they had to do is sit at home and take out that photo and check it against the app to see whether those candidates are reflected as having received that many votes or not. So the whole country became our verification tool. We didn't have to wait for the parties to query any results. We knew anybody in the whole country would be able to query the results, because they could easily do it sitting at home. Now, this results app, when we developed this, we also threw in the 2014 results in it, so that before the election, you could play with the app by looking at the 2014 results, so you know what exactly to expect in the 2018 election. And then we decided to be a bit more playful, and we put in more statistics. And now, after the last election, you can see on the screenshot, there are 3 election results there. We put in a seat calculator on the app. Fiji uses the D'Hondt system of calculating seats. Now, right now, there would be very few people in this entire country that can actually do the D'Hondt calculation and give you the seat calculation. But you can have that done directly on this app, and you can put up your mock numbers and come up with some results. So it comes in handy to candidates as well. I will not delve too much in this. I'd like to invite you to download the app and view it for yourself. The interesting statistics here is that the election happened on the 14th of November. And if you will look at the screen, we recorded a 4,835% increase in the download of the app. That's a massive increase in terms of one particular app on any given day. And this is 2 days of download, a 4,000% increase in the downloads. The average rating is 4.23. Mostly people rated it as 5. And as the election concluded and the candidates started losing, the ratings went down. But before, as they were getting results and the candidates were doing quite well, it was all 5. But that's generally with any election, you know. And you can see that the downloads, 90% of the downloads happened in Fiji, and it's 65,000 people downloaded it in a matter of 2 days. So that is a huge milestone achievement for us, because those are the active 65,000 people that were looking for the results of the election. And so yeah, so if I'm looking at this and I have to go and ask for a pay increase, I say 4,000% to my bosses. That should give me a pay increase, double maybe. But looking at some of the other apps that we are now doing, I would like to apologize to all the millennials who are listening to this right now, but in the next election, I'm looking at employing a lot of millennials in the election. And one of the things that we non-millennials think of millennials is that they get to lose their attention span very quickly. And here, what my team is doing is they're developing a polling station management app. So basically, consider this app as a hour-by-hour instruction guide to the presiding officer of the polling station to say, have you done this? Confirm that you have done this. Scan this QR code so we know you have done this and you are in the polling station and you haven't left, and blah, blah, blah. So these are some of the things that we're doing to assist presiding officers. But more importantly, what this app does, it is reducing the reconciliation errors in the polling station. The Peter would confirm this. The most advanced technology that used to be given to presiding officers in a polling station is the calculator. And in today's world, every person that works for a polling station will carry a smartphone. So from the calculator to the smartphone, we don't need to continue being like the calculator. The smartphone offers a lot more opportunities, and this is where the HR team is going to be asking people to be bringing their charger along with them to the polling station, so that they are able to they're able to charge their phones and not lose the thing. And then also we're able to track a lot of things. If you see the second middle portion, there is statistics reporting. I want to be able to, in the next election at 9 a.m. in the morning, tell the country directly from the results coming in from this app to say, so far, X thousand people have voted. At 11 o'clock, I want to say again, X thousand people have voted. So whilst it is going to be a precursor to others, hey, push people to go and vote, candidates will also know that, okay, we're not going to be doing very well if there's only 30% turnout for the whole country. And the last bit I wanted to touch on is the results. Now, this is going to be the crunch time. And sometimes the calculator doesn't help you reconcile. So the app is going to be there for people to just, the presiding officers to enter the people, number of people that have come, the number of ballot papers issued, and the app will help you fill out the protocol of results and sign it. So automation in the polling station, I introduce you to the Fijian Elections Office Polling Assistant app. I'll just move on to the next one. The survey app. The Fijian Elections Office historically, for the first time, was able to conduct a survey on the turnout at the last election. And what we did, the entire survey cost us roughly $30,000. That's 15,000 US dollars. We managed to survey 14,000 individuals. We paid $1 per survey. And what we did was, Amendra and Neelam, these two people from the office, they developed an app. And the app was given to every person who was recruited to carry out the survey. And elections office staff had to survey 100 people each. And the rest was done by people we recruited from the field. The survey app was basically an offline app. And what we did was we recorded the information in the app, and whenever it reached service, internet, it would transmit the information to us. And the questions were there, the 21 questions, and the staff would go and take out a voter card, meet a voter and ask him for the voter card and ask them these 21 questions. And then one of the things the app knew was who voted in the last elections and who didn't vote in the last election. So if someone had voted in the last elections, they would get the voted questions, and someone who didn't vote in the last election would be asked, why didn't you vote in the last election? And they would have 7 options to answer. So essentially we were trying to figure out why the turnout dropped from 84% to 72%. And then the survey app was very useful. This survey app will now remain a property of the Fijian Elections Office, and we intend to do more surveys using this because it's so cheap. I mean, $1 per survey using this technology. We don't even have to go and meet the staff who's doing it. Just simply allow them to download the app, sign in, and they carry out the survey for us, and we pay them at the end of the exercise. The Mercury app was our logistics tracking app. So if a ballot box was moving from location A to location D, the Mercury app was used to scan it at B, C, and D. And basically that's what it used to do. It's a operational app, very useful in the last election because we had to hire 115 people and they were only hired for 7 days. And we didn't want to train them for 2 weeks to work for us for 7 days. So we made the app, and the app did all the work for the next 7 days. And then the people were let go. So instead of hiring someone for 3 weeks, because of the app, we hired them for 7 days, and all they had to do was learn to use the app. So that's automation for us. This is an IT diagram. Basically, the app speaks to the web server. It goes to the database, and the end users, that is us, we get to see nice graphs and charts and pie charts and green, blue, and yellow, so that we know, okay, if it is yellow, someone's getting a whoop on the phone. If it is red, then someone's getting fired. Hopefully it's not red all the time. So that's basically there. Ladies and gentlemen, I will quickly talk about the challenges. In terms of challenges, as an election practitioner, the first thing I look at is the resources on the ground. We are an island country, 110 inhabited islands. I know Indonesia has about 7,000. So the first thing we look at is the level of development in our infrastructure. Connectivity is an issue. So the survey app was an offline app. It stored all the data until you reached a place of connectivity, and then it would quickly dump all the data to us. Another one is electricity. Because it is mobile phones, we have to charge it. But the best thing is Facebook helps us with this. People need to see their Facebook, so they need to keep their phones charged all the time. And this is where our app works all the time. Then we have to follow some of the very strict requirements of the operating system service providers. They have their own rules that we have to regularly keep up to. And this creates some problems for us because sometimes the development team has to focus a lot of energy on the apps to maintain them within the framework. We always have this issue of inconsistency in usage. It's a training issue, but it is a challenge because people might just switch off the app for the whole day. And there you go. Mohammed Sanim wanted to read out all the results by 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. And here we have a staff who hasn't reported for the whole day. So how do you deal with that? And then I use the word brain freeze. It's more like trying to beat the technology dinosaur age, where people don't want to use the technology. They want to still use the calculator. I just had one of my bosses sent me an email and said, I don't like to receive this information on email. Send it to me in a letter. So I replied to him and I said, boss, can you write me in a letter to say I have to send you a letter? And he laughed and he said, fine, I'll use the email. But that's some of the brain freeze that we have to overcome. In terms of risks, I think when it comes to automation and technology, Bill Gates is the most appropriate person to look at. Automation, as Bill Gates said, automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. So in elections, the greatest risk is that if our process is not proper in the first place, and we end up automating it, we're not going to improve the process, we're going to destroy the process. So that is something we have to consider. And in the Fijian Elections Office, we do brainstorming. And in the brainstorming session, there is a lot of disagreements and arguments. And a lot of people end up throwing pencils and pens and stuff because if you don't properly discuss and brainstorm the process before you automate it, you will end up having an inefficient system. And what's the point of doing automation? Is no. So the other risk is critical failure due to infrastructure. As I said, if the person does not send you the data for the whole day, you don't have anything for the whole day. So it's only as good as what your end user does. Then we have the risk of sabotage and hackers. The Fijian Elections Office in Fiji, we just recently launched an online recruitment platform. So you can apply to work in our office. It's new for our country. You can apply to work in our office without having to send a paper application. And you can register on this platform so that if there is a new application, you simply just apply for it directly from that platform. I went out on LinkedIn and I said, spend your COVID time wisely, apply on this system while you have the time, register so that when there is an application, you don't have to spend 15 to 20 minutes trying to enter your details in the system. Lo and behold, 2 days later, the whole system was hacked. So every time we come up with automation and we mention it anywhere, it becomes a target. It becomes a target. People want to try and take down election websites. People want to try and take down election technology because why? They become heroes. I don't know for whom, but it's a kind of fetish, I think. So I now end my presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, automation is cost cutting by tightening the corners, not cutting them. This is said by Harris Sipi, and I completely agree with you. There is many times when we have reacted as this little girl has reacted to on the screen, and we look at it and go, what? It can't be. And then the phone gets broken or certain things happen that we don't really want to do. But In my view, ladies and gentlemen, we need to, election management bodies in situations like us need to consider automating small aspects of the election. Automate small aspects and continue to automate so that then later on you can entirely automate, but you're not going to have a quick jump from a full manual system to an automated system. You need to go slow, not be over ambitious. The country next to you might be doing very well. Learn from them. You don't necessarily have to replicate them. And eventually you will get there. So that's my 2 cents worth on this presentation. And I'd like to thank the organizers for considering Fiji as a case example. And I'm looking forward to your views at the end of the discussion. Thank you. Inakavaka Levu.
Thank you, Mr. Sanim. A very impressive presentation. So many points that we can learn from your presentation. I can say that between Fiji and Indonesia, we share some similarity. We are archipelagos country, but in a different size. In last national election in 2019, this is an illustration for you that in Indonesia, we have more than 8 million polling officials to run the election. So the 8 million polling officials scatter from the national level until the polling station level. So you can imagine how to manage more than 8 million officials to conduct the elections. And also in last 2019 election, we have 190 million voters. It it made us as the biggest one-day election in the world. So it's very complex. And me myself believe that technology can make it easier, but it's not one day technology that we can implement all the technology like what you have in Fiji, in Indonesia within one day preparation. As you said that we cannot quick jump, but we have to start slow and then learn from other countries. So that's why we have this discussion today. To invite our participants. I saw so many colleagues from Asia Pacific countries joining our discussion, and I also would like to welcome Ibu Telly from USAID who also joined the today's discussion. For the next, I would like to invite Ms. Rona N. Caritos after we have Mr. Sanim with his impressive presentation about the automation in Fiji's election. Mr. Sanim is supervisor of election of the Republic of Fiji. Now we continue with Ms. Ron and Caritos, or I call her Ona, my best friend, my close friend from Lente. She is executive director of the Legal Network for Truthful Elections, or Lente Philippines. Ibu Ona, in Indonesia, believe it or not, when we talk about the election automation, our politicians often refer to your election. Your automation election with your ECM, election counting machines, your process, and so on and so on. I would like to invite you to share your experience. I know that you have long experiences in assisting the election in Philippines. Could you please share with us to deliver your thoughts on the civil society contribution in election technology monitoring and audit, and also election technology, to share with us your knowledge on the election technology contribution in improving the quality of election and democracy in the Philippines. You have 15 minutes and the time is yours. Please, Ms. Ona.
All right, thank you, TP. I just would like to comment on Mr. Sanim's presentation. He said that Fiji took the slow journey towards automating the electoral process. In the Philippines, we took the quick dive towards automating our elections. We piloted automation in a regional election, and then we fully automated our elections. The whole election day process almost a decade ago. We automated fully our elections 2010. We started automating our elections 2010. So I smiled when Mr. Salim said that they did it slowly in my county, and I think this is where the comment of Indonesian politicians are coming from. That we took the plunge, that we dive right to the automation of our elections. So let me share my screen. And I promise Titi that I will not go over the time given to me, the time allotted. Let me share my screen. Right. Okay. Again, good afternoon to all the participants, to my fellow panelists in this event. Thank you to Perludem, thank you to Titi, thank you to Ninis, thank you to Joyce for inviting me and Lette again to present our experiences and insights as to automation and elections in the Philippines. So for the next 12-13 minutes, I'll be talking about civil society's contribution in e-counting audit mechanism and our perspective on the effect of e-counting on the election process or the electoral process. And first, so I'll be talking about the contribution in e-counting mechanism. And in our law, in our automated election law, Section 29 provides for a random manual audit. And it provides there that where the AES is used or where the automated election system is used, there should be a random manual audit in one precinct or congressional district, randomly chosen by the COMELEC in each province. Basically, the random manual audit is our public school teachers or our poll workers, our electoral board members, physically counting the ballots from the districts represented to be part of the RMA and comparing it to the count of the machine. So it's checking, the RMA is a way to check the accuracy of the machines used in the automated election system. And in Lente's case, in the 2019 national and local elections, or our midterm elections, as we call it in the county, Lente became the partner of the Commission on Elections, our election management body, in the conduct of the RMA, or random manual audit. Is to determine whether there is systemic error in the use of the AES machines in counting the votes across districts nationwide. We always tell the general public or to the different stakeholders that the RMA is not a tool to check the authenticity of the election results. It's not a tool to verify the results, but it's a tool to check the accuracy of the machines, of the vote counting machines used in the election. So that's always the thing that we say to our stakeholders and to the general public, because I think there is a confusion as to the purpose of the RMA. So we always tell that to the general public. But the CCSOs come in because COMELEC can't audit itself, because COMELEC is the one in charge of procuring all the vote counting machines or the VCMs. They're in charge of training the electoral board members. The electoral board members are the ones in charge of running the elections on election day. So the RMA can't be run by COMELEC because you can't audit yourself. That's not part of transparency. It goes against the standards of transparency and conflict of interest. So that's where CSOs come in. So CSOs are part of the RMAC, or the Random Manual Audit Committee. And the Random Manual Audit Committee, or the RMAC, supervises the RMAT, or the Random Manual Audit Teams. The Random Manual Audit Teams are poll workers or public school teachers in charge of physically counting the ballots, just like what I said earlier, tabulating their count, their manual count, and comparing their manual count to the machine count in the selected districts in the elections. The RMAC, or the Random Manual Audit Committee, is composed of the COMELEC, or our election management body, Philippine Statistics Authority, and civil society organization. And in the RMAC, the CSO is the chairperson or is the assigned chairperson. So the CSO is leading the RMAC in the random manual audit. And the Random Manual Audit Committee, just like what I mentioned, is composed of 3 main organizations, COMELEC, PSA, and CSOs. In the 2019 midterm elections, the CSO contingent came from Lente, my organization, and from PIPA. And the functions of each organization is in this slide. So COMELEC is in charge of providing logistical support as to the operational needs of RMA. The PSA is a government agency in charge of designing the statistical principles and the randomness of the audit to be done. And Lente and PIPA, they're the CSO component of the RMAC to ensure transparency in the audit process. So basically, on audit days or during the RMA, what happens is the electoral board members or our poll workers, they randomly count the ballots, physically count the ballots. And our members, Lente members and PICMA members, supervises this manual count of the electoral board members. So for 3 weeks, for 21 days, Lente members and PICMA members supervises the physical count being done by the random manual audit teams or our electoral board members. And in the 2019 midterm elections, our manual audit reported a 99% accuracy of the vote counting machines, of the machine count. So, and it's the highest in the 4 automated elections conducted since we fully automated our elections a decade ago. The 2019 national and local elections recorded the highest accuracy rate of the machine count. Going to my second part, the effect of the e-counting on the election process. First is confidence in the election process. One positive effect of e-counting on our electoral process is the confidence of the voting population, of the Filipino voting population in the electoral process. Another effect is on election adjudication that I will be expounding more later. And a bad effect, so I'll be discussing also a bad effect of automation in our elections. It's more fraud was committed outside of the machines. Fraud outside of the machines became more prevalent. And I will be explaining later why this is one of our observations as to the effect of e-counting on the Philippine electoral process. And I just want to show clippings or screen captures of survey results done in previous elections. And the last major election, the 2019 midterm elections, and social weather station survey said that 4 out of 5 Filipinos find the May 2019 polls believable. 2016, 2013, in a Pulse Asia survey, 63% of Filipinos surveyed by Pulse Asia believe that the 2016 elections was more credible compared to the 2013 automated elections. And comparing the 2016 elections, presidential elections, to the 2013 midterm elections, more people believe, 89% of the respondents in the Pulse Asia survey believe that the May 2016 elections was more believable than the May 2013 elections. What point am I driving at? It's that Filipinos are now more confident of the electoral process because of automation. And that's why we say that one of the effects of e-counting in our electoral process, one of the major effects of e-counting in our electoral process is the confidence level of people in the process. And as we all know, one of the standards in genuine elections, as Patrick Morleau said in his article, it's public confidence in the results of the elections. And that's what automation of our elections gave to the process in the Philippines. Another effect is on election adjudication. Before we automated our elections, and I'm a lawyer I'm a lawyer, but I really don't practice in the Philippines. During elections, lawyers would always tell each other that it's their harvest season. Filipino lawyers earn a lot during elections because there are a lot of cases filed left and right because of elections. But that was before we automated our elections a decade ago. Ever since we automated our elections, the number of electoral protest cases filed decreased. There's a statement by an election law practitioner in the Philippines that in all the protest cases filed in the Philippines in the 2010 up to the 2016 elections, no recount of ballots have shown that the machines used, miscounted, or were proven to have compromised. So that's one of the positive effects of automation in our electoral process. Before, election cases, protest cases were filed left and right. That's like what I said earlier. Filipino lawyers were earning a lot because of election cases. But after automation, lesser and lesser number of cases were filed. A bad effect of automation in our election, and this has been our observation since we automated a decade ago, because candidates and political parties and candidates did not know how to cheat the machines. They resorted more to vote buying. And in the 2019 midterm election, I just screen captured an article. And in this article, a COMELEC official, an election commission official, admitted that vote buying became a more persistent problem. And he said that talking to candidates in the elections, candidates were telling him that they could no longer cheat during the automated polls, or they could no longer cheat the machines. They could not bribe the machines. Unlike people before in an automated election system where they can bribe or threaten our poll workers. Now, they can threaten the machines. They can threaten our vote counting machines. So our politicians, ever since 2010, focus on vote buying more. And we've seen how much the value of a vote has increased. How much candidates are spending to buy votes from our voters, and how much they're investing on their vote buying schemes. And this is really one of the bad effect of automation in our electoral process. More and more people resorted to old school fraud, as we call it, in the Philippines, to vote buying, to threats, intimidations, because they could no longer threaten or bribe the machines. So in this, just to end, in this article, the COMELEC official asked the priest or the church to just focus their efforts, their election monitoring efforts, on vote buying, education against vote buying. And so that's the end of my presentation. Just to recap, our observations as to the effect of the electoral process, there are two major advantages. One is the increased confidence in the electoral process. Second is the lower number of protest cases filed after the elections. And third, the bad effect is more incidents of vote buying and the higher value of votes, or how much votes are being bought in the Philippines. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ona. It's very impressive, and so much knowledge we can gain from your presentation. It is very interesting that CSO is the chairperson of the Random Manual Audit Committee. Yeah? We can learn much from your presentation for Indonesia, for example. Before we continue with Pak Peter Wolf, I would like to inform the participant from Indonesia that we provide you with interpretation tool. Bapak Ibu bisa memilih tombol atau feature interpretation di pojok kanan layar Zoom. Nanti Bapak Ibu klik, kalau Bapak Ibu ingin mendengarkan terjemahan bahasa Indonesia, bisa mengklik pilihan yang Japanese. Jadi bahasa Jepang, tapi sebenarnya itu bahasa Indonesia. And also to all of you, if you have any question to our speakers, you can chat the question on Q&A feature. You can see the feature of the question and answer or Q&A on the screen, on the Zoom screen. You can type your question on the screen, or you can raise your hand so I can identify who you are that want to submit your question. Okay, for the next, I would like to invite Bapak Mr. Peter Wolf, senior expert of international idea, to deliver his presentation about the development of electoral technology in the world, and also the benefits and risks of using electoral technology in different countries. And not forget to inform us about the influence of electoral technology to improve the quality of election and democracy. Pak Peter, you have 15 minutes and the time is yours, please.
Thank you so much, Titi. Let me try to share my presentation here. When Paludem kindly invited me to do this presentation, and Titi mentioned it already, I was asked to talk a bit about the development of election technology around the world, the risks and benefits, and also the contribution of technology to improve the quality of elections. And I thought maybe I'll not repeat some of the things that have been said and mentioned already before, but maybe I should just try to look into the development of the last 1 or 2 years and see how much all of the things that happened is kind of resonating with some of the points that were made earlier on those questions already. What I realized though is that quite a lot of things have happened. So Titi, in case I'm going too long, please just roughly interrupt me and say this is enough. But I'm just going to give or try to give a very brief overview of some of the noteworthy things that I've realized were. So first of all, and your introduction, you also mentioned, there's many different types of voting technologies. One of them is certainly technology that's used for voter registration. So just taking a look at how the global map of voter registration technologies at the moment looks, that's actually maybe the one picture that is not changing so much. So countries have pretty much the systems in place that they've been dealing with for quite some time. The orange countries here on the map you can see are countries that are basing their voter lists mostly on civic registry. So basically they can extract the data from existing civil registration databases without a lot of registration activity by the election administration. And that doesn't change a lot. So those countries are pretty much fake. The blue countries are countries where the election administration has to conduct their voter registration exercises themselves. And here quite an interesting separation or distinction to make is maybe those countries in the darker shades of blue that use some sort of biometric technology, so fingerprints, pictures, and so on, as part of their voter registries. And the lighter blue countries that don't have that, so you can also see biometrics is quite popular more kind of in the southern part of the globe, not so much actually in the countries that use civic registration-based systems, and also like Canada and US and so on. This is less common. There's a few countries here in yellow as well that use kind of online systems where people can actually use the internet mainly as a tool for voter registration. But overall, again, this picture has not changed a lot in recent years. There's a bit of development when it comes to voter identification. So the process is in polling stations. How do you figure out, are the people that are showing up in the polling station eligible? Have they voted once or twice? Technology to replace the traditional paper voter lists. So there is more and more countries popping up around the world where those kind of technologies are being added. You can also see on the map here, there's 2 types. Just devices, electronic poll books that don't have biometric information included and used in the countries that are marked yellow here on the screen. And then biometric voter identification devices that are marked blue on this screen. And here you can see that actually one of the other countries is being added even in recent months or years. One example would be Albania in Europe, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. They've upgraded their technology quite significantly for recent elections. Voting machines, electronic voting, of course, is always a question of interest. When you look at the long-term history of those technologies, for sure, progress has not been as fast as was assumed in the early days of electronic voting in the early 2000s. So back then, there would have been assumptions that by now, many more countries would be using either voting machines or some ballot scanning technologies like in the Philippines. So far, there's only 27 countries actually that use one or the other electronic voting machine in polling stations. But there have certainly been a few interesting stories that have developed in the last 1 or 2 years. One of them was the Dominican Republic, where unfortunately, when they introduced voting machines in 2000, they only figured out very last minute, or actually on election day, that some of the machines were misconfigured, that the ballots didn't show up properly, that it was basically not really possible to vote correctly on those machines. So they literally had to suspend voting on election day and postpone actually elections for another day, which of course, created some uncertainty and even protests, as you can see on this picture. Albania, as mentioned before, is quite an interesting story. Albania has a long story of two sides of the political spectrum, mainly not a lot of trust between the two. There have been long discussions about using more and more technology because of this distrust, technology for voter registration, but also electronic voting technologies. It was always a bit of a question, whether this could happen or not, the infrastructure in the country also being quite limited and so on. But quite a big step was made in this year, actually in 2021. So Albania has now deployed voter identification technologies, biometric devices, actually quite a unique thing in Europe, to their polling stations. And they've also introduced the first set of pilot voting machines, which has actually gone without a lot of problems. So that was quite interesting to see, a quite smooth, even though relatively small, pilot implementation of voting machines. A much bigger case, and probably the biggest newcomer when it comes to voting machines in recent years, was Bulgaria this year. Bulgaria has had elections in April. Back then, they've actually bought some 10,000 voting machines, and an interesting aspect of that system was that in April, it was actually possible for voters to choose whether they wanted to vote on paper, like in the old elections, or whether they wanted to use those new voting machines that have been added. Overall, there were issues, and this article that I put on the screen here is focusing on that element. There was issues in a few hundred of those 10,000 voting machines where voting had to be discontinued because there was a problem. But overall, the machines worked pretty much okay, I would say. But an interesting element is that Bulgaria will go into another election this summer again, so only a few months after. Bulgaria has actually changed the election law in the meantime. So this option of choosing between paper ballots and machine voting that was there in April has now been removed. And actually, the voting machines are meant to be deployed now to all polling stations and for all voters, and voters actually have to use the machines then. And that is creating a bit of an issue at the moment. This decision came pretty much at the last minute. So the decision was only made last month, I think, in May, that voting machines would have to be expanded. New machines had to be purchased at last minute. Prices went up. Delivery is not clear yet. So a lot of uncertainties around the situation about the use of voting machines in next month's elections in Bulgaria. But that's probably the biggest case of an expansion of voting machines this year, last 1 or 2 years. I also find quite interesting always, of course, to watch what's happening in the US in different elements of the electoral process. When it comes to voting technologies, one thing I found quite interesting is that the voting system providers now seem to be, at least in the American, of course, very much litigation-based electoral process, striking back against some of those claims of rigging of voting machines. And all of you who have seen technologies implemented in elections, you probably are aware of that. There's oftentimes claims and sometimes well-funded and sometimes not so much about the systems probably being problematic. So of course that was quite an extreme case in the US, how the machines have been discredited and how there was an attempt made to undermine the credibility of elections by that. And interestingly now, the voting system providers are going quite heavily with billion-dollar lawsuits against those who made those accusations. So quite interesting when we heard from the Philippines before, maybe less complaints by political parties against the process, but now in the US, actually, we've seen also the companies actually suing contestants in this case for disinformation. Also in Pakistan, of course, because we're discussing the Asia Pacific region, interesting discussions still going on, both actually for the use of voting machines in polling stations, but also for the use of online voting, which has been implemented already for a few thousand voters, voters from abroad in recent years. And so those discussions are continuing at the moment. And that already brings me actually to the topic of online voting. Especially when the COVID pandemic broke out, there was quite an interest in many countries in online voting. Of course, online voting seemed to be the obvious solution for voting safely in a health emergency like this, allowing as many people as possible to vote from home. But also it became quite clear in many countries that were interested that just introducing online voting at short notice as a response to the pandemic is just not possible. Introducing online voting takes much more time to prepare the systems properly. So it's almost impossible as a quick reaction to a pandemic to do this. But obviously countries who have online voting systems in place would have it much easier to deal with the pandemic and to use those systems. But when you look at the map of the world at the moment, the use of online voting is still very, very limited. So the one country that uses it without restrictions, Estonia, is this tiny dark gray dot here in Europe. And otherwise, you can see some countries in orange that use online voting for some areas, for some regions, or for some local elections. But in most cases, actually, online voting and the biggest potential of online voting is right now actually seen in voting from abroad. So letting voters that otherwise maybe don't have the opportunity to vote at all or vote by post, which can be quite complicated and costly for large elections, to give them the opportunity to vote by online by computer. So that seems to be the most promising application of online voting. Some interesting developments around here was Lithuania last year. As a response to the pandemic, actually at fairly short notice, an election law was drafted that would have allowed the election administration to introduce online voting within actually a few weeks. The idea back then was that at least voters who cannot come to polling stations because they're quarantined or for health reasons would be able to vote online. But obviously, because the law was passed so shortly before the elections, it was just literally impossible in the end to basically implement those online voting provisions that were envisioned in the law already. Interesting case also in Switzerland. Some of you might have followed the stories earlier in 2019. Switzerland had been using an online voting system in several parts, in several cantons for quite some time, for many years. Had also done quite a lot of things by the book, certified those systems, did a lot of quality control and so on. But they've only released the source codes, the access to the details of the system in 2019, and it actually only took a few days until an academic group found some issues with the security in those codes. And actually back then, Switzerland decided to suspend the system until those issues are resolved. But now, as of the end of 2020, they seem to be getting on track again and relaunch some limited trials of that system that was suspended. Also quite interesting, we just had elections in Mexico last weekend, and for the voters from abroad, the availability of online voting has been actually expanded quite a bit. Not yet for the national elections, but state by state, several states now are offering online voting for Mexicans abroad. When it comes to the question of what are the benefits of technology, a lot of this, of course, has been discussed in publications already. Also, a very recent one that was published by Preludem, and we supported this project a little bit as well about the adoption of voting technology. So there's many details there, but clearly the benefits of especially those kind of front-end technologies that I've been discussing now, the vote identification, registration, the electronic voting, and so on, that you can speed up the process, that the process can be much more accurate, that you can actually reduce human intervention in the process, which means that less mistakes are going to be made. But as we heard from the Philippines, also if there's issues with irregularities happening in this human process, of course, you can eliminate this to some extent to with technology as well. We also had this excellent example from Fiji about all the data that can be published. So you can be really very transparent about the election process if you have all the data electronically, and also if you go the next step and make it available, easily accessible, of course, that greatly increases the transparency of the process. So overall, clearly with technology, it's certainly possible if it's used the right way as well, increase the integrity of the process to prevent certain types of fraud, also to increase voter convenience. So especially as we're more and more talking about, the possibility of online voting from home, of course, the convenience for voters is a big factor as well. And I think the question of voter mobility and also responding to the pandemic obviously has been a big one in the last 1 or 2 years as well. We see on one hand, of course, the restrictions by the pandemic and hopes that technology can bridge some of the gaps that are opening up here. But we also see, in spite of this, people are more and more mobile, either internationally or even with their own countries. And certainly, some of those technologies can actually certainly help to provide access for voters that are not necessarily on election day in the polling station of their home constituency. But the risks that have been mentioned before already, we've also seen them in also some of those recent cases that I mentioned. There is certainly also a risk of a loss of transparency of the process. So of course, on one hand, you can make data available and make the election more transparent. On the other hand, if a lot of people don't understand anymore how the technology works, if they just don't get a good grip of how the system is operating, if you can't see it as physically anymore, as you could before, certainly the risk of losing transparency is there with technologies. Incompatibilities in all kinds of different ways with the legal framework, of course, can be a challenge. As I mentioned before, Lithuania had that case of a law that envisaged online voting, but in reality it could not happen. In Bulgaria now they said, well, everybody must vote on voting machines, but maybe it's not even possible to bring on in those machines in time. So synchronizing how laws are being passed and what is technically feasible still remains clearly important. Vendor dependence and costs are certainly still factors that are also in some of the examples that I've mentioned. So it can be really hard for EMPs, especially when technology is new, to run those systems with a great degree of independence from the vendor. So as the opposite, often they're really very much reliant on all the services that are provided, and also in a costly way dependent on those services. So easily, especially if it's not well planned, costs of elections can easily go up with some of those advanced technologies too. Rushed implementation, not having enough time, of course, is one of the old risk factors that comes with election technology. So countries that make it right usually are the ones that take a lot of time to introduce the technologies. Also, of course, to train their staff to make sure that the staff, but also the stakeholders are aware of the systems and can understand what's going on. System malfunctioning, I mentioned a few recent cases already. It's always a risk, especially when some of the elements above are not falling in place. If the system came in too fast, if people are not trained enough, the system is not tested enough, that can easily be sometimes quite grave errors in those systems as well. Cybersecurity, from Fiji, we heard already, it's always a thing, and it has become more and more prominent already since the 2016 elections in the US, that there is simply a risk. When you use technology, there is a risk of the systems being hacked on one side, on one hand, of course, from the outside by external intruders, but there's, of course, always also concerns about the robustness of the system against any manipulation attempt from the inside. And I mean, we're not talking about social media at the moment, but of course, in this world of disinformation where we are living, technology can also become an easy target of just disinformation, of claims that these systems have been hacked or can be hacked, and countering this can sometimes be quite challenging too. So that's why I found the US approach and all of those multi-billion lawsuits quite interesting. And obviously all of this can then come together in the worst case when those things are not, and those risks are not well managed to undermine or even lead to a complete loss of the public trust in the technology and in the elections as a whole. What can be done about this? I think I'm already running out of time a little bit. In those publications, we have introduced the pyramid of trust a long time ago that lists all of the different components of trust building, from the technical to the legal, to the political and social elements, the time factor, of course, being a very important one. But the trust question I find quite interesting. At most conferences, it comes up on and on again. And there is an other way to look at trust, and maybe that's the last slide I'm going to use here. When you look at research, what makes people trust an institution? This is true for electoral management bodies, but also other institutions. Sometimes those factors that I put on the compass here are coming out as the key elements for making voters, making people trust in an institution. The trust of communication, really being transparent, explaining everybody what's happening and why it is happening, and being open to questions and responding to questions are very important trust element. The trust of competence. So when I mentioned before vendor dependence and so on, if there's an impression that the EMB is not competent enough to run the technologies that they're having, that can be having a deteriorating effect on trust as well. So competence is certainly an important element of institutional trust as well. And then a really important one is also familiarity. Familiarity of the stakeholders with the process and with the work that the election administration is doing. And I think this is where a lot of the challenges with elections technologies are coming from, especially if the technologies come too fast, if they're introduced without a lot of transition time. Stakeholders are simply not familiar with the changes, with the new systems. And just that fact that you're not familiar with what's coming, that you cannot really project what the impact of those technologies is going to be, is by itself already a factor that can undermine trust. And then, of course, values are always important. The value of an institution must be kind of credibly projected as well. Certainly, if the institution itself doesn't enjoy a lot of trust, the technologies they're using is not going to be adding a lot of value, and they will actually be help to undermine the trust as well. So certainly, trust of values and credibility of the institution important to back up the trust in the technology that's being introduced. One very last point, actually, that's coming just in Europe at the moment and in the European Union is this emergence of the artificial intelligence as the new technology that might have a key impact on the future. The European Union is working at the moment on a risk-based approach to artificial intelligence. So they really want to categorize like all applications of artificial intelligence in the areas where the risk is unacceptable. So social scoring, for example, will be one of those unacceptable risks, and those apps will be completely banned. But then they also have like high, limited, and minimal risk applications. And when it comes to high risk systems, they will actually demand a lot of obligations for making sure they are being operated in a secure way. And one of the applications that has been by the EU suggested to be a high-risk process is technology, artificial intelligence technology in democratic processes. What that exactly means is still to be seen, but I found that quite interesting to highlight because some technologies that are used in some elections already quite widely, biometrics, also the character recognition, the pattern recognition involved in ballot scanning, for example, are seen as machine learning technologies by some, are seen as some form of artificial intelligence. So that will be quite interesting how that kind of risk-based approach in the European Union is going to deal with those technologies as well. And this is where I end my presentation for now. I think I've probably exhausted my 15 minutes, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot more we can discuss in the Q&A session now.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Peter, for your presentation. We gained so many knowledge and information about the election technology. And also for those of you who wants to study about the adoption of technology handbook for Indonesia, you can download the English and Indonesian version through IDEA website, www.idea.in or through Perludem website www.perludem.org. Bapak Ibu, honorable participants, now we come to the question and answer session. Because of the limited of time, I only opened one question and answer segment. So I invite you to submit your question. Now we already have 2 questions on the Q&A feature. The first question is from, I will read the question to all of you. I think the question, the first question is from Mr. Arif from Indonesia. Question for Mr. Peter. I would like to ask about IT system in macro perspective. In simple way, I can say there are 2 IT systems usually applied in many sectors. First is centralized system in terms of election. Validation will be done by central authority body in Indonesia, which is called KPU or Election Commission, National Election Commission. Database server will be placed in KPU server. Second is decentralized system, or many people say it as a blockchain system. In terms of election, validation will be done by the voters. His question is, which system is better to be used by us, especially in Asia, and why? Thank you. That's the first question from Mr. Arif Syaiful from Indonesia. And the second question is from Anonymous. Question to Mr. Sanim, to Pak Sanim. Apart from the charts in your FEO results apps, is the raw data of election results also open to the public, and in what format? That's the second question. And the third question from Mr. Yos Kenawas, PhD student from Northwestern University, US. Thank you to all participants for your insightful presentation. I have 2 related questions regarding the adoption of blockchain in elections management. Is there any case of the use of blockchain technology in election? Have you or your organization consider using blockchain to improve the integrity and security of electronic voting? Thank you. Thank you, Mas Yos, for your question. And I think for the English question, I would like to invite Mbak Kirana to translate the first question and the second question. The last question is from Pak Ruherman Syah. Mbak Kirana, you want to type the translation, or you will directly read say the question? Okay, please, Mbak, you can do it now.
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Kirana. I hope you can all hear the question clearly. I would like also to invite you to deliver your closing statement following your answers. So for the first opportunity, I would like to invite Pak Peter Wolf to respond to the questions, and then follow by your closing statement. Pak Peter, time is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I didn't hear the English translation. I had the translation switched off, but I'll try to address the artificial intelligence question that actually came through twice. Sorry, not the blockchain question that came through twice. I think with blockchain, one has to be a bit careful. It seems to be a term that's a bit hyped at the moment, and promises, there's promises for blockchain is going to fix all the issues of technologies in elections and beyond. In general, most of the technologies that we've been discussing today are not involving any blockchains yet, those election technologies. There are some applications, so especially when it comes to online voting, where blockchain elements are built in. Sometimes they're also built in slowly in a result process where you can actually kind of secure some of the data in the result process. But I'd be very careful when it comes to those promises that, this is going to fix it all. This is the simple solution. When you look at some of the fundamental issues that have to do with some of the technologies we mentioned, just making sure that only one voter, one vote, that only eligible voters vote, to protect the secrecy of the vote at the same time with protecting the transparency of the process and so on. The contribution of blockchain is fairly limited to some of those core problems. And there is other systems, and I don't want to go into details, but encryption and electronic signatures and so on that can achieve a similar amount of security. And then the question is, of course, still, you could use blockchain to distribute technologies across a broader range of stakeholders, that the systems could be run jointly together by some stakeholders. That sounds in principle quite interesting, that you say, well, actually, it's not only the election administration that runs the service, it may be a group of, political parties, other stakeholders that are kind of pooling the resources. But I don't see the big breakthroughs yet. I sometimes am a bit worried that there's too much hype around it, that the promises are a bit too high. So let's see where this is going. So much for blockchain at the moment, and maybe I'll let the other speakers give a round of answers to some of the other questions.
And also there's another question, Pak, I think to make it in one time. There's a question from Pong Sak Chanon. Do you know which country using e-voting that got hacked the election result, and what happened after that? That's the question from Mr. Pong Chanon. Please, could you please answer it, Pak Peter?
So, hacked in the sense that, elections were completely changed and, a different result came out of the system. I don't think we had any cases like this. So most of the cases that you can see where you have security issues is where you just discover, well, there is a weakness in the process, and that weakness could be exploited. And of course, you don't want to have, an election running on a system that has a potential weakness that could be exploited by somebody without even noticing. And that was the case, for example, in Switzerland, when I mentioned that they had to postpone or abandon their system for a year or so. They just found out that some of the actual mechanisms that were meant to protect the integrity of the electoral result could actually have been used also in worst case circumstances to circumvent the security of the system. But this was only a theoretical possibility. It did not really happen, but that already was enough. The fact that this was possible, the fact that this also got known, and force the election administration to withdraw that system. So it's more those kind of security incidents that you see possibilities and weaknesses, rather than that the whole election is completely stolen by changing the figures.
Okay, thank you, Pak Peter, for your response and answers. For the next, I would like to invite Mr. Sanim to respond to the questions submitted by the participants. Time is yours, sir, please. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the raw data, based on my limited knowledge of computers, it's an Excel sheet which is 245 columns and 2050 rows. That's what we give out to anybody who wants the data in the raw format. That's as raw as what we can go. We do have the scanned protocols of results from each polling station, and that is there in our records as well, in case the court wants to verify the results against the data that we have. But essentially, anybody who requests for the raw data of the election is 2,000, and it is free. It is given in a USB stick. It's about I think 16 gigabytes, I think, somewhat like that. And we give it out to a person who requests it, and it is made up of an Excel sheet that has 245 columns and 245 rows and 2050 columns, something like that. So that's what we give out. Because it's a single constituency, and you have candidates who can contest anywhere in the country. So you can get a vote anywhere in the country. So any polling station can have a vote for you. So that's why the data is so big. And that is why we use the app. In the app, you can actually go down to candidate to polling station. So you can get candidate results by polling station. So that's how detailed the app is. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sanim. And then for the next, I would like to invite Ms. Ona. And also, Ms. Ona, could you please respond to the Mr. Luherman Shah question about the law enforcement and also the legal basis for election and technology? Time is yours, Ms. Ona.
Okay, just to answer that question, we have a specific law, electoral law on the automation of our elections. We have two automated election laws in the country. The first automated election law and the second one is the revised automated election law. Election offenses on going after hackers, if ever there will be hackers of the transmission of the results, of the servers of Comelec, of the servers of the Citizens Arm. So there are pertinent election offense provisions, punitive provisions in this automated election law to address offenses pertinent to the automation to that. And just to answer blockchain also, that the question on blockchain, a number of groups in the country is also proposing the use of blockchain technology, and I'm happy to hear Peter saying that the use of blockchain should be considered slowly because it's still a new technology and it's not yet proven. And just to and also my message, I think Indonesia, I think, is in the process of exploring automation of its elections. And what I learned through the years of observing our elections and elections as well in other countries, there's no one solution that fits all countries. You can only learn from the good practices of the other countries. And I hope that Indonesia explore the good practices, but not fully adopt the automation experience or process of another country. Because as what UTT mentioned earlier, Indonesia is a very unique country in its own. So there has to be a specific solution to it as well with regard to automation.
Okay, thank you all speakers. But before we continue to closing statement, before you come up with your closing statement, I have another questions. I mean, because I'm an Indonesian and I need to learn from all of you about the disinformation. It was very interesting when Peter highlight about the disinformation, because in Indonesian last election there were so many disinformation about the technology. When the technology met with the political polarization, the disinformation is not only about the technology but also about the EMBs. Maybe you have some tips and tricks how you deal with the disinformation and handle the disinformation. And also there were an appreciation from colleagues from Indonesia about the random manual audit committee, because in Indonesia in 2019 we also implemented tabulation technology, what we call it Sirekap. but the audit process handled only by election commission and the state agencies. There were no involvement of civil societies. I think we can learn also from Philippines' experiences how we invite more inclusive process to audit the technology. So now I would like to invite you to deliver your closing statement. Let's start from Ms. Ona. Ms. Ona, time is yours.
Okay, just to answer your question about disinformation, what I learned through the years, and especially in the last midterm elections, the disinformation is always against the technology or the system used and against the election management body or the EMB. And my tip or my suggestion to all practitioners, especially our friends from the election management body, is to address the issue right away. Because if the issue is not addressed right away, then the disinformation becomes more viral and it's shared by more and more people. So there's a need to quickly address the issue before it becomes more prevalent or before it becomes shared by more people. So our EMBs should have a definite communication strategy and a crisis communications plan when it comes to a situation like that. And to end, just like what I said earlier, I think Indonesia, in the process of it adopting technology in its elections, should take into consideration the unique context of the country, because you have millions of poll workers, you have millions of voters, and just like what I said, you can't adopt the process of other countries, but you can learn from the good practices. You can learn from what Mr. Salim said about the election app. That's a very good app that I also messaged him that I learned a lot from this app. So I think Indonesia should do that, to learn from the good practices and not just adopt from the processes of other countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ona, for your impressive explanation and presentation. Now, let's continue with Mr. Sanim. Mr. Sanim, please answer the question about disinformation. Do you face any disinformation in Fiji's election or not? And also your closing statement. Mr. Sanim, time is yours.
Thank you very much. If someone has the time, all you need to do is Google 2018 election, supervisor clarifies app information. In 2018 election, after well, we were nearly going to announce the final count. 5 political parties, they conducted a press conference, and in the press conference they challenged the results on the app, and they came up with various allegations about the results that were published on the app. And as the supervisor of elections, I had to conduct a press conference, and in that press conference I had to counter that very information. And what I had to done was that I took the copy of the pink slip which is pasted outside the polling station, and the white slip of the results which is the official results that is entered into the result system. And then I had the IT team print out a special result from the result system. And I took screenshots of the app and actually made the media open the app in front of me. And I made them go line by line, result by result. And I showed them what the actual app results were as against the pink slip or the white slip or the result management system. And of course, it was all matching because we use a double-blind data entry system and there is no way that the results should be wrong. So we matched that, and then just to make people more comfortable, we matched a few others. And then 2 years after the election, around what is this? This is June. So around April, when the Standing Committee of Parliament was doing its consultations around the country, we had a similar allegation from one of the rural polling stations where a person stood up and claimed to be an election official and said, oh, the results at my polling station were different from the ones in the app. So what I had to do was, again, I pulled out the scanned version of the protocol of results, and I took the app and the result management system printout, and I had to once again take the media through the whole mill to show how the data was in fact matching by number. So the result that we were publishing in the app, as soon as we showed that link, I think we won the battle against misinformation in relation to the information in the app. Because until then, there would have been some level of doubt that people would have had that, okay, something might be wrong in this app. But when we actually took the challenge up and showed by real fact and evidence how the numbers matched, I think that's where we won the battle against misinformation. So that's how in Fiji we do this. We use actual data. We bring data and we verify. So brings me to my point. If you have a look at the Fijian Elections Office 2020 to 2023 strategic plan, we introduced a new concept from the auditing world into elections in Fiji. The term verifiability is now a strategic value of the Fijian Elections Office. And we said that verifiability in terms of elections, so as to say that a process that is conducted by the Fijian Elections Office, were it to be conducted by another person using the same set of rules, the result would be the same. So essentially, we are challenging people now with our process to say, look, if we are going to move 100 ballot papers from point A to point B using our process, this is the process. You can move the ballot papers using the same process and it will be 100 equals 100. Direct verifiability. No room for anyone to play around with it. Similarly, if we are entering data for 100 polling stations, which is saying candidate X got 10 votes in each polling station, if you enter the same data in your Excel sheet, your result will be the same as our result. So we're bringing in the concept of verifiability. It is on our website. You can download our strategic plan and you will see how we are trying to introduce this. And this is where it brings me to my closing statement. The reason why we are developing, in fact, the MyPA app, which is the polling assistant app, is because of this exact issue. We want the reconciliation to be easy. But for the presiding officer, that app is going to improve the reconciliation. But in fact, at the back end for the election administration team, that app is actually giving us verifiable data at the end of the count. Meaning, if by 11 o'clock, the polling station had reported to us that they had 80% turnout, and then in the eventual count in the night, the polling station gives us 60% turnout, or the results for 60% of the voters at that polling station, that's a red flag for us. I mean, because the polling officials only get trained to work for one day, systematic abuse of our system is not going to be easy, because here they are going to innocently enter the data at 11 o'clock and say, oh, out of the 650 voters, 400 have voted already. And then they can't at 11 p.m. in the night return to us results for only 300 ballot papers. Where did the 100 ballot papers go? So whilst the app is an attractive tool to presiding officers, it may look very sexy to election observers and pundits, the back end of the app for us as election administrators is very, very critical. It is going to allow us to step by step track the election process, step by step from data innocently entered. Of course, there can be a plus or minus of 5 because election officials may have been careless, but at the end of the day, it can't be that 100 ballot papers are suddenly missing from the count. And that's what only possible if someone is attached to the phone. And as I said, we are using it for millennials. So definitely they will feel obliged to enter the data during the day. And that is critical to our operations. Every tool that we have invented at the Fijian Elections Office, whilst it may serve a community purpose, there is a back-end interest in that tool. And that back-end interest is quality assurance, quality control, as well as information verifiability. That is so the 2020 to 23 strategic plan is based on this tool as well, that we want to be able to verify every aspect of the election. In our country, there is a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of mistrust created by politicians deliberately, because if they lose the election, they blame it on the election management body. It's not their fault they lost it, it's the election management body. So in that kind of situation, we need to not only be able to stand up and shout back and say, oh, no, we didn't do that. But the approach that we use is, here's the facts. And here's the evidence, you make up your mind. You can't defeat facts and evidence. And that's how we go. So in terms of misinformation, the best tool is information and correct information. So that is our approach in terms of the Fijian elections experience. I'd like to also close by thanking Peludem for organizing this workshop. I've learned a lot. I was chatting with my team. We're going to take Rona up on an offer. I think having an independent audit team for the Fijian elections results is also a good idea. And we will definitely consider setting up a framework so that an independent team is also in Fiji, verifying the results as we go. Our results are already verified by 4 steps within the FEO. Might as well have an external team who can help us out as well in terms of the misinformation. So definitely we will look at expanding that framework and developing a guidelines and a framework so that the verification of the results by an external team is not only credible but is also effective. And definitely we'll be working on this. So thank you very much once again, and I look forward to participating in future workshops that you run. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanim. We are so glad to know that we can exchange information among us, election organizers and civil society on election and technology experiences in our country. For the next, last but not least, I would like to invite Mr. Peter Wolf to give your response and also your closing statement. Time is yours, Pak Peter.
Thank you, Titi. I think I can actually combine the closing statement and the disinformation, because that's exactly how I wanted to close. Basically, one thing I still remember quite clearly from the early days of election technologies, that there was a lot of skepticism about election technologies. There was an argument that said, well, if a process is good, it doesn't need a lot of technology. And if a process is bad, if it's not trusted, technology won't help. I think by now we have actually seen that technology can actually add a lot of value in electoral processes. It can increase the quality, it can increase the integrity of elections, and we've heard a few quite good examples today. But of course, that also only happens if technology is really implemented according to some of the good and best practice that we've, amongst others, captured in some of the publications that Titi was showing already earlier. So following best practice is super important. Unfortunately, it's still not always the case. So wherever you are, just remind your electoral management body to follow those good practices. Remind them when they are skipping a few important steps. I think that's always an important thing to do. I think it's also important to realize that technology, of course, is always only one element of elections, one element of electoral integrity. It will never fix everything. We heard from the Philippines. Well, if technology fixes one element, things can move on to others. So be also very careful about unrealistic promises. This technology is going to get rid of everything, no matter what technology it is. Be it blockchain or be it something else, there is a contribution, but there is no magic fixes for some of the problems either. And disinformation is exactly what I think is going to be a key next frontier for elections technologies. And I think that's for two reasons. On one hand, as I mentioned before, you have a complexity of technologies that's not easily understood. And when things are not understood, of course, that's the perfect ground for creating disinformation stories around it. I mean, the other element is something that I think Mohammed has mentioned as well is we have a lot more data. We can make the process a lot more transparent. We can provide all the details about the process, but people who built this information can also pick on the data. They can just pick out things that might look strange and present it in a confusing way and build disinformational stories on this. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. Tackling this, of course, is going to be really hard. Disinformation is the unresolved issue of our times, I guess. But I think for the two stakeholders that we have present here at the moment, I think for EMBs, it's probably a question of upping communications, right? So going from voter information as it was done before to more strategic communication, being prepared for those kind of incidents, being prepared before, preempting some of the issues that might come up already with proactive communication, and also being prepared for the moments when those things are happening. So I think communication on the EMB is going to be a super important element on the way forward. But I think also the civil society will have to play a really, really important role here. And just in the early days of elections technology, I think a key role and the most important role for civil society with technology was the role of a watchdog. Nobody wants to have blind trust in technology. So the role of civil society was check the EMB, right? Double check, audit, count, recount, do everything that can be done to check the EMB. But I think now another role of the civil society is going to be, because because of this auditing role, you understand the process, right? You understand what's the correct accusation, what's the wrong accusation. So you have to maintain this vigilance. You have to remain this role of a watchdog. But I think it's also important that an independent actor can actually then also, portray fair information and counter disinformation and say, well, actually, we are following this. We've been tracking this, and this is just not reasonable interpretation of some of the information that's out there. So I think big exercise for both the MPs and CSOs in the future to tackle this information, but at least we have a few starting points for now.
Okay, thank you so much to all the speakers. Now we come to the end of this discussion. I would like again thank all the speakers for its insightful and enlightened presentation, to Mr. Mohammed Sanim, Supervisor of Election of Republic of Fiji, and then Ms. Rona N. Caritos, Executive Director of the Legal Network for Truthful Election, or LENTE Philippines, and also Mr. Peter Wolf, International IDEA Senior Expert on Election and Technology. This is not the last discussion about the election and technology. Hopefully, we will have the follow-up discussion to talk in a more comprehensive aspect of election and technology. If you want to recheck the discussion conversation, you can visit also Perludem YouTube channel, because this discussion stream on Perludem YouTube channel. Maybe you want to learn again about the point of the discussion. And don't forget to all the participants, this is a regular discussion series. So we will continue the discussion about the Southeast Asia election and democracy in next event. I think I don't need to conclude the discussion, because all the speakers already delivered its presentation very clear with its message. Again, thank you so much for your participation to give enlightenment and also share your knowledge and experiences. To all the participants, thank you for joining us, and see you again for the next Southeast Asia election and democracy discussion. See you again. Bye-bye. Stay safe, stay well to everyone. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Pak Peter. Thank you, Mr. Sanim. Thank you, Ms. Ona.